Hello YouTubians. We have a little bit of a dilemma. You see, when it comes to putting videos on YouTube, there's two options. Either you become a partner, which means that you have a lot of subscribers and you can put as much video on as you want. Or if you're not a partner, you can only put on 15 minutes. So right now we don't have enough subscribers. So if you want to watch our full video, you can come and see it at our website. Otherwise, we're going to try, hopefully, to get enough subscribers. So if you want to sign up, that would be awesome, and then we could put our videos here if that's where you prefer it. So, you and get your friends, and, we can hang out here. Otherwise, come visit us at our website. Hey guys, welcome to the show. As I'm sure you're aware, winter is here with a vengeance right now, and in many parts of the country they're just getting hammered with snow. We're a couple inches away from setting a record for a month worth of snow, and that's not including the giant blizzard we had for Christmas. And it's all beautiful and pure white and perfect when it first comes down, but once it really starts to settle in and then melt and freeze and melt and freeze, it's dangerous and it's a problem, and it's not as much fun as it was when it first fell. So eventually you do need to get out of your house, and whether it's cabin fever or work or whatever, life goes on, so you have to be able to get out there safely. So there's a lot of different ways that you can move your snow away from your house. And a lot of people like to use ice melters, either to get rid of the snow or as the snow melts and freezes again to deal with the puddles and the ice. So when it comes to ice removal, this is the first year that I've really been on my green adventure. So I was really concerned about what kind of ice melt should I really be using, because I don't want to be poisoning anyone. So I looked into it. And it turns out that there's a lot of different ones. Some are better than others, and they work in a lot of different ways, which I didn't really realize. So not only can this melting and freezing snow be really annoying, it can also be really damaging to your walkways and your driveways and your sidewalks, because it will melt and then seep into places, and then it'll freeze again overnight, and it'll expand, and that'll cause a lot of things to chip away and break down. So if you're going to be using ice melts, I would recommend that when they melt and when you have the slush, to try to get rid of it whatever way you can, whether you shovel it or squeegee it or sweep it up with a broom. Just get it off your concrete in your driveway or wherever you're putting it, because that's gonna cause a lot of problems with it, like chipping away and stuff. So that's the first thing I want to mention before I even talk about the different types of ice melts, because it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Whatever one you are using, it can still cause damage if you're not careful. I mean, you could obviously get a heated sidewalk system. You can put hot water or electrical heating coils underneath your walkways, but come on, who can really afford that? It's much easier, obviously, to stick with the ice melts. The way most ice melts work is that they, when they combine with the ice, they lower the freezing point. No, they raise the freezing point. Yeah, so it makes it turn more into a slushy, slurry kind of thing. It's usually called a brine, and not to be confused with the brine you use in cooking. There are advantages and disadvantages to all of the different types of ice melts on the market. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the different kinds and maybe a little info about them all, because they're very confusing if you don't know. There's a lot to, when you go to the store, it's so. Okay, the first group of them requires friction when the temperature gets really, really cold, because they only work up to a certain point. These kind of things are like sodium chloride, which is rock salt, potassium chloride, and urea. So basically for those, heat is required in order to form the brine, and that heat usually comes from friction. And if it gets too cold, then there's there's no heat for it to draw from in the atmosphere or around the area that it's in, and a lot of times it won't work. So that's why these are used on roads and places where there's heavy traction, but not so much on a walkway, because you can't really get enough friction that way. So that's why when a lot of times the cities and stuff will use rock salt, because it's the cheapest, and also because there's a lot of friction there, so it helps it to work properly and effectively. But you know, as far as like a sidewalk is concerned, it's not really going to do you much good. It's just, especially when it's really cold out. The second group that might be more effective in those situations are chemicals like magnesium chloride and calcium chloride. These materials provide their own heat. Actually, it's really interesting. They can somehow draw the moisture from the atmosphere, and they somehow convert that into heat, and it will, you know, the chemical reaction will, you know, produce enough heat to melt the ice. So in situations like walkways or where it's really, really cold, those are much more effective. Then the brine can be created in much lower temperatures. How much lower? Well, calcium chloride can melt ice down to negative 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's pretty amazing. However, calcium chloride also tends to, in order to do that, it has to suck a lot of moisture in. So because of that, it's more prone to making a lot of puddles and also sticking to your shoes and coming in the house with you, which is referred to as tracking. So you have to be careful of that. As long as you have like a mat to wipe your feet on, you'll be fine though. Magnesium chloride is also prone to tracking. And most of the products on the market have a mixture of those two ingredients. A lot of the ice melts now are not just one ingredient, there's more than one. So you gotta read the label so you know what you're buying before you buy it. So I'm gonna go down and go through each one now. Give you a little more information. Rock salt is also known as halite or sodium chloride. And like I said before, it's the most basic and it's definitely the cheapest of the ice melting chemicals. It's really just big, chunky, industrial grade salt that's not refined enough to be used on your table. It's cheap and it's readily available, so it makes it very appealing to a lot of people. But it does have a lot of drawbacks. For first of all, it's fairly corrosive and can cause a lot of damage to not only your cement and your concrete, but also to the vegetation in the areas that are around your walkway as it washes off. So especially if you have to usually use a lot more of it. So it's only effective down to about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold in most of the country, but you know, it's not perfect. So you have to keep that in consideration. It's not really something I would use around my plants. Calcium chloride. Now this is another popular one. It's a little bit more expensive, and this is the one that I tend to use a little bit more often. This one is, when you think of ice pellets, like the little ice melt pellets, you're probably thinking of calcium chloride. They're kind of like a grayish kind of thing. I don't know. Anyway, calcium chloride is a lot easier to spread because of the way its shape is and stuff, but you want to make sure that you wear gloves when you touch it because you don't want to be touching it. But it works in much lower temperatures than the sodium chloride, so it's really helpful for that. And it also works a lot faster. I remember I was doing my driveway recently and I would take out like small containers at a time because the bag is like 25 pounds and I'm not lugging that outside in the ice. And every time I would come back inside and go back outside, like where I had just laid it, it had started to melt. So I was like, that's crazy, but it works really well. Sometimes you can even hear the ice cracking as you spread it, so it works really well. Magnesium chloride is another one that is used a lot, and you'll see in the mixes. It's a very effective ice melter as well, but it only works down to about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. It is safe. It's safe on concrete and on vegetation, but it's not as effective as calcium chloride, because magnesium chloride, it requires more product to be used to get the same results. So you have to weigh your options on that one, whether you want to go more magnesium or more calcium chloride. That's totally up to you. Magnesium chloride comes in little pellets or in little flakes, and it works exothermically. So that's that one. Potassium chloride is another one. Now, potassium chloride, which is a common fertilizer. You might remember the name potassium chloride from that. So it's pretty good as an effective ice melter, down to only around like 12 degrees Fahrenheit. But even though it is a fertilizer, it's tricky because it's not actually safe for vegetation in high doses. And since it melts ice so much more slowly and so much less effective than calcium chloride, you have to use high doses. So before you go and smother everything with it, you want to be careful that you don't overdo it if you're near vegetation. Now, urea is another one that's often labeled pet safe or plant safe, because urea, I'm sure you know, urea is like a urine nitrogen type thing, and it's labeled as pet safe because it won't agitate pet paws. Now, the reason that that's important is because when pets walk on any of the ones that suck the moisture out of the air that I mentioned, or even just salt, it'll irritate their paws and it'll make them want to lick their paws. And if they lick their paws, they're going to get sick from it by ingesting the chemicals. So you have to be careful of that. Especially large amounts of salt can make them really sick, and you know, it's not really safe. And anything with chloride in the end of the name is a salt. So obviously, you know, it makes their skin like itchy and dry, and they start licking, and it's really bad. So urea does have some corrosive properties, and it's often a lot more expensive than the sodium chloride or the calcium chloride. So you have to keep that in mind. But because it is a fertilizer, it's not super terrible to lay out. Even though it only melts ice down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It is also safe around metal and rebar and steel and concrete, much more so than the others. So if you're willing to pay the extra money, it's a lot more safe. But it also works a lot more slowly than the calcium chloride. So again, you have to weigh your options. Another option are acetates, which includes sodium acetate and calcium magnesium acetate. It's an interesting name. Acetates are environmentally friendly, so those are pretty cool. You can go after those, but they're of course more expensive. So again, you have to really decide how much you want to spend on your ice melt, and whether or not you just want to say, forget it, I'm just gonna lay down some kitty litter and just deal with it that way. You know, because you could, instead of just melting the ice, you could just provide traction. If it's not really ice but like packed snow, sometimes that's easier and less of a problem, you know. That way you could just, then you don't have to deal with the melting and freezing if you just lay down some kitty litter or whatever. But when it comes to the ice melts, most companies use a combination of different chemicals. So it makes your deciding a little bit easier if you're not sure which way you want to go. They'll combine the more effective ones with the less expensive ones for you. So weigh your options, and now you know what you're buying, and then you can decide accordingly. Most of the ones that are labeled heat generating are mixtures of calcium chloride and other pet friendly or less expensive ones. And again, the pet safe ones are mostly urea. So while many of the above chemicals are advertised as environmentally friendly,